And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. In May of this year, British Columbia took a critical step towards reducing the shame and fear associated with substance abuse as Federal Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health announced a granting of a 3-year exception under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act to remove criminal penalties for people who possess a small amount of certain illicit substances for personal use. On today's Open Connection, we bring you this story from 1990.
You weren't managing your airway and we didn't know what you'd taken.
Calcium, Valium, anything else that you
What else did he have, Glenn?
Yeah, he was supposed to be calcium, Valium, and there's one other pill. We've got the bottle with us. You've got to put a tube down your throat into your windpipe and breathe you, okay?
Is he responding at all?
Well, that's the whole point. He spit out an airway earlier, but he's not now.
So that we could manage your airway and you wouldn't vomit any of that stuff down into your airway. And so then we did that. And then we pumped your stomach.
You can see the veins, but you just can't get into them because they're just so torn up with all the drugs he's been shooting up into himself.
They were going to do... You sure you're good earlier, did you?
Did anyone manage to get blood samples?
So put in 180.
Somebody to hold this for me, I'll be delighted to draw blood.
Okay.
I just want somebody to stabilize all these tubes at the front.
Okay, then when you're done, just... Next weekend.
You can do a thing more?
There's a V.
Oh.
No, just keep it right down there. We'll be through in a little while. You'll be fine.
We pumped your stomach out, we put a bunch of charcoal down there.
Keep your arms down.
Just keep your eyes closed and try and forget all this, okay? It'll be over soon.
No, you can't go tonight. You're at St. Paul's Emerge, okay? You're going to be staying here for a little while. I'm just going to put this mask on you. Yeah, keep it on, okay? No, you can't do yourself in tonight.
We treated you like we would any other overdose. And now you're awake, and you're right back where you started from.
Tonight, Al Framboise nearly killed himself with drugs. Tonight, Dr. Philip Severy saved his life. It's another night in the emergency ward at St. Paul's Hospital. And being rushed to hospital may be the best chance most addicts have for getting help. That's because, for most of them, there are only rare moments when they are willing to seek treatment on their own. And because the waiting lists for treatment are so long, those moments get missed.
We missed them a lot. We missed them a lot. In the needle exchange program, for example, people that request intervention, we have a lot of trouble getting them in, even sometimes getting them into detoxification facilities. We have trouble, but let alone residential treatment facilities.
How bad is it? Well, in one 3-month period, the city's needle exchange referred 34 people to treatment programs. Only 8 of them got in.
We just don't have it. We don't have what we need at a street level to service people involved in at-risk activities.
This is what Turvey means by an at-risk activity. IV drug use may now pose the greatest danger of all for spreading the AIDS virus. And when users share needles, it's like Russian roulette. But even when they want treatment, those same users are forced to wait 3 months to get into a program. Let's say that an IV drug user injects 4 times a day. Some would do it less often, and some would do it a lot more often, but let's say 4 times a day. Now, at that rate, asking a junkie to play Russian roulette for another 3 months is like asking him to put the gun against his head and pull the trigger another 360 times. And entire communities are in the line of fire. Virtually all of the prostitutes working the downtown east side are also IV drug users. Some may already be infected with AIDS. The City Health Department has determined that there are 57 active IV drug users in Vancouver who have the virus, and the total may be higher than that. And consider this. It's estimated that 1 in 5 of the Johns who hire these women are refusing to wear condoms. Will this man be one of them? After he leaves here with a hooker, will he later go home to the suburbs? Is he married? If he gets infected, who will he infect? What about the man in this van? If he gets the virus, will he take it back to Richmond or Coquitlam? And what about the man in this Cadillac? Where might he take the virus? Shaughnessy or West Vancouver?
It's a time bomb. It's a ticking time bomb. To neglect it would be just about criminal. And basically what is going to happen if you neglect it now, the culture will be paying the dues and the cost of that neglect for decades and decades and decades to come.
In every community?
In every community, because it's not just going to end up isolated here. It'll be taken everywhere.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea.
So every time an IV drug user tries to get treatment and can't get in, our city is a little worse off. And every time an addict sets foot on the long and difficult road to recovery, it is a small step forward for all of us.
Well, like you said, you got 2 choices. You got really 3 choices. Stay just like you are, kill yourself, or start crawling out.
And I felt like killing myself tonight.
You felt like killing yourself tonight. You don't think there's another way out?
Not anymore. I give up. I give up. You're telling me that I was just about dead when I came here? Pretty close.
If you'd been left in the street or left in a hotel room by yourself, you probably would have died, yeah.
You can tell me you actually relate with that.
Yeah. I'm not relating from it from my personal experience. I'm relating from it from having worked in an emergency department for 20 years. That's the best I can do. You want to relate to people that have been where you are, you need to go into a 12-step program like Narcotics Anonymous and stay there. Just keep coming back. Keep going in. Just keep going. Even if you sit in the back of the room, you don't say anything. Even if you go in and you say, geez, I don't know what I'm doing here, this is no good. Get yourself a counselor and keep coming back to the program and stay in it.
You said that will work.
It isn't drugs you need. It's hope and love.
Well, I need fucking something more than I got now.
I'll call. Okay? I'll call him right now.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Tree planters are paid per tree planted or piece rate. Per tree price depends on difficulty of land being planted, and it varies from day to day. The tree price will be between 12 up to 26 cents per tree. Let us return to the archives to learn more about tree planting life.
20 years ago, young men and women like Chris Reed were almost unheard of. Most of us had scarcely heard of replanting. And even today, most Canadians don't think of tree planting as a career option. But young people like Chris are becoming increasingly visible across the Northwest. Camps of planting crews living in tents are a common sight today. And in the last few years, the planter's life has improved considerably, and crews are no longer forced to live out of a knapsack. Although the transient life of a planter is still rough, many young people have made a career out of what started out as a summer job.
I like the money, mostly. And the job itself has some benefit to it. I mean, I feel good about doing the work. I like to work really hard and then rest really hard. So it gives me time to travel and do what I want to do instead of being tied into a 5-day-a-week, 365 days a year.
How long have you planted?
This is my 6th season. So, but they're seasons, they're not years, you know, average about 6 or 7 months a year.
Chris Reed is 29 years old. He grew up in Maple Ridge and since beginning to plant has crossed the province following the season. He's now the foreman of a 15-member crew and he usually calls the group together in March, then heads to the Queen Charlotte Islands for the first of the season. As the weather heats up, crews move inward and north. The days are often long and working outdoors can be a challenge.
We get up at 5, leave for work at 6, and we pull out of here at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We work 4 days on and then 1 day off. And yeah, occasionally there's days between contracts. Every 3 or 4 weeks you might get a 2-day, 3-day break. It's a really difficult job, especially to do a long season, because it's one thing to do it for 2 or 3 months, and to hang in there and do it for 6, it gets a little bit much. But it's a lot of fun, it really is. I mean, it's a hard job in a lot of ways. It's getting up really early, and there'll be pushes at the end of a contract where you have to work 6 days straight, and sometimes low bid ground where you can't make your average. But you're working with a lot of other good people that are kind of all in the same boat kind of situation, and it's a lot of fun.
Many of the planters in Chris's crew have been with him for several years. Planters say no one starts out with the intention of sticking with the dirty work, but for many, the freedom and the cash are hard to give up.
I like planting because I get to come outdoors, work outside, and make some money. And yeah, it's a pretty good lifestyle. I average probably about $250 a day, so, you know, it's tough to beat that. Won't you smile for the camera?
Mike Lovely is only 25 years old, and he's already been planting for 4 years. He says his parents don't think it's funny anymore and would like him to find a more conventional job closer to home. But he says planting has allowed him to do a lot of things most people don't get a chance to do.
A lot of tree planters are out there for making money for school and stuff. A lot of tree planters go traveling. That's what I'll probably end up doing this year, is go traveling down, I think South America is what I'm thinking about this year.
Like Mike, Montreal-born Michelle takes the time between planting seasons to travel.
I don't know for now. Last year I was in South America, and this year decide at the end of the season probably.
Together, these 3 planters probably put 3,000 seedlings into the ground every day. It sounds amazing, but since planters are paid by the tree, they have to be fast and they have to be efficient.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Tree planters are important for the reforestation process. Every day, a tree planter has an important job of handling and planting hundreds of seedlings, giving each one a best chance for survival and growth. Let us return to the archives as Chris shares how many trees he can plant in a day.
Paid by the tree, around 25 cents a tree average. Sometimes more for the harder ground, sometimes less for the easier ground. Plant about $9.50 a day for an average, 1,000 trees a day. I don't know, last year I made 26,000, I guess, something like that. It's a really tough job. Basically what you're looking at is investing at least 2 or 3 months just to get reasonably good at it, unless you're very, very strong and very keen. As a matter of fact, on the average, I'd say that most people have to put in a whole season, basically an apprenticeship, to become good enough at it to make, say, $200 a day. And then once you get to that point, a lot of people just can't take it. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress. You got to do it right, and you got to do it fast.
Besides physical dexterity and a well-coordinated drop-kick plant, planters have to have a fairly good idea of what grows best where.
They all go into a different area. Let's go into a shaded area, and this goes into a very well-drained, dry site, and this goes into a organic, sort of duffier site. And you decide that as you're planting.
A lot of the knowledge comes from experience, but some forestry companies hold training programs for the planters. An expert on site preparation and replanting techniques, Kevin DeRoe coordinates the crews that plant for Skeena Cellulose. It's up to him to make sure the site to be planted is prepared for the planters.
There's different ways of doing that. We wouldn't necessarily completely clear the slash cover off, but we would prepare spots where the trees are going to be planted by using a hoe, for instance, with a rake type attachment. Or we could come in and pay the planters a little bit more, for instance, to remove the material before they plant a tree.
Kevin will also decide what % of each species will be planted on each site. Because of the problem with single species plantations, foresters no longer plant just the most valuable tree.
The general idea now, from our point of view, is to match species to a certain ecosystem association that are most appropriate for the site. We plant as many as 5 or 6 species in one block, and the species we plant are species that are appropriate for the site on a high elevation, or not a high elevation, on a steep slope, dry ridge top, for instance. We might plant lodgepole pine. Intermediate slope areas, we'd plant a hemlock, a malbus for a mix. In the lower depression areas where water tends to accumulate, we'd plant cedar and spruce, for instance. Species that are matched to the site and would grow there naturally. The primary things we look at are obviously the species adaptabilities to the site, the economic criteria of that species, if it's a valuable species. Obviously, there are pest concerns, there are pathological concerns. Some species have a much shorter pathological lifespan than other species. They tend to deteriorate a lot faster.
Kevin DeRoe says the industry favors replanting the quicker growing species because second growth stands would be ready to log that much earlier. But after acres of spruce trees planted in the 60s were destroyed by termites, the industry realized Mother Nature's method of a little of this and a little of that was a much better way to plant.
It was, again, logged back in the 1960s and planted to pure spruce for the most part, which created a really good food source for the Sitka spruce terminal weevil. And because of that, we were looking at about a 15 or 20 year time frame. The spruce trees that were on the site were well established, but they were little bonsai shrubs. And there was a fair bit of brush as well. So in this case, we had to come in with a big heavy-duty brush cutter and cut the brush during a time of the year when we'd get the least amount of regrowth from the brush.
Kevin says deciding what to plant depends as much on location as on economics. He says foresters and planters have to recognize and work with that.
This is about a 15-year-old hemlock. Hemlock's I'd say it's the most common species you see around the terrace area. And in our planting program, about 50% of the trees approximately that we plant are hemlock. On this particular site, the hemlock isn't doing as well as other trees because it's such a dry site. Lodgepole pine, for instance, on this site grows a lot faster than this particular hemlock tree. Cottonwood grows best on well-drained sites, quite moist sites, along rivers, river terraces, and so on.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
British Columbia prides itself for being a world leader in sustainable forest management. Since specific reforestation programs began in the 1930s, over 7.5 billion trees have been planted. In this final segment, Open Connection, we return to the archives with Archie McDonald.
After we plant it, we follow it with a survey, and that we would come in at the end next year to determine the survival of the seedlings. If some seedlings didn't survive, we would fill plant. Then we followed up with further surveys. Before we do any treatment, we survey in advance. Then there's all kinds of other treatments that could happen. There could be brushing and weeding, where you go through and ensure that the trees have plenty of room and space to grow up. Then there's thinnings as the trees get older, followed by commercial thinnings, where you space the trees out and actually remove. The trees are large enough that they can be manufactured, and then followed by being cut down again, the final crop. Generally, we monitor it very closely for the first 15 years. A typical site will have anywhere from 3 to 5 to more entries where we survey the site to ensure that they are growing. We have the desired species, crops, etc.
McDonald says Skeena Cellulose plants 2 trees for every 1 log. However, there are no figures available for how many trees actually reach harvestable stage. But one thing is certain, the success rate for replanted sites is much better now than it used to be.
The success rate has been improving dramatically since over the past 20 or so years. One thing, the seedlings that we get are growing under ideal circumstances. Whenever they're taken out and planted, stress is put on the seedlings. This causes a small percentage to fail. By getting better stock, the nursery's improving, our planting techniques improving, the correct species being planted on the sites. All of this has improved the success rate.
It would seem replanting logged-off sites in BC is slowly becoming an accepted part of the forest industry. But the change isn't coming quickly enough to avoid a critical problem period, according to some professional foresters. Terrace resident Doug Davies has worked in the industry for almost 20 years, and he maintains the industry should be doing more than it is.
We have a real imbalance now. We have a lot of young stands in the 20, 25, 30-year-old age classes, and then we have the 200 or 300-year-old stand. Now, once those are gone, these small ones aren't quite ready to be logged yet. So we're going to have a time there when we're going to sort of go on hold until everything grows up. And it could take, I don't know, 20, 30 years. Well, there's lots of jobs gone, and mills are going to go away and everything else. But that's it's a fault of not recognizing the problem fast enough and managing and treating what we had with the care it was required.
Davies says the fall-down effect will eventually affect the entire country. He says the forest industry will never relive the golden years of the past, because even though the replanted sites will grow, no company is going to wait 200 years to let another old-growth forest come in.
By the time these stands are 70 years old, we're going to be in a pretty bad position as far as woods. So we're not going to be harvesting the humongous trees. I mean, all of a sudden, the things that are this big around are going to start looking pretty good to us. And if we start harvesting that young of stands, then we're going to set ourselves back even further, you see what I mean? So we've gone too far, and it's going to be a matter of catch-up now, I think.
Davies says it's the same do-it-now attitude that continues to prevent many companies from establishing adequate replanting programs or maintaining the sites properly.
Sometimes you have to spend a little bit to make sure you have something in the future. But it's such a far-flung future that to invest today for 70 years from now is awfully difficult for some people to swallow.
Davies says in the future, BC should do what some Scandinavian countries do and include the cost of silviculture in the timber license. He says we can't afford to keep thinking of planting as an additional expense.
And we have to build those costs of silviculture into logging plans. Everybody has to know ahead of time what it's going to cost, and the money has to be there. We can't be performing silvicultural activities in good times and then saying, oh, to heck with it when the markets are low. This has to be an ongoing process.
Another problem that contributes to the poor state of overall reforestation in the province, according to Davies, is the system of awarding timber licenses. He says companies have no incentive to do a better than barely adequate job because when their license expires, the site may be awarded to another firm. Davies says a better way would be to copy the American system of private ownership.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.